agency, her secret sauce is creating meaningful connections between people that become clients, collaborators, resources, mentors, and friends. She discovered this gift when she founded and ran the networking organization Business Among Moms. She's passionate about supporting small businesses and helping experts share their messages with larger audiences. When she's not working with clients, you can find her walking her crazy Chihuahua-Jack Russell, having dance-offs with her kids, watching Saturday Night Live with her husband, or listening to some of her favorite podcasts. Please, everyone, put your hands together and join me in welcoming Julie Fry and today's topic, Increase Your Visibility with Podcast Interviews.
Thank you, Debbie. What an awesome introduction. And thanks again, Cindy, for inviting me to share a little bit. This is a 20-minute presentation, so I have a lot to cover. I am just going to go ahead and get started. Bear with me while I share my screen here. So I am going to be talking about how to get more clients with podcast interviews. So I can't see all of you because I am sharing my screen. Is that working for everybody right now? Or can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, hang on just a second.
So let me see here.
It's weird when I'm not running the show here. Here we go. How about now? Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'll go into present mode. So who listens to podcasts? Any podcast listeners here? Just raise your hand. Awesome. I see a few. I'd love it if you would enter into the chat box some of your favorite podcasts. And I'll keep talking while you're typing away. One of my favorite podcasts is hosted by, I don't know if you guys can see who's behind me on my wall there. It's a little hard to see, but that's one of my very favorite podcasts, and it's hosted by Conan O'Brien. It's called Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend. It is hilarious. It is 45 to 60 minutes of sheer hilarity. So if you need a laugh, that's my go-to podcast. So why podcasts? Why are we talking about this, and how can it work for you as a marketing strategy? There are many benefits of podcast guesting. So number one, it can boost your credibility. When you show up on a podcast, and once you start showing up on podcasts as a frequent guest, you can add those appearances to your media page on your website. You can have a PR page that shows as seen on and lists those podcasts. It really elevates you as a thought leader in your space. You can grow your network. So obviously we're here, we're networking. Guesting on podcasts is an amazing way to grow your professional network. I'm gonna just set my timer too, so I know that I don't go over, because as I am digging into this, I can see where it's gonna be hard for me to get through all this content. So let me just put in my timer. What do I have, about 18 minutes more, 17 minutes?
Just take 20, just set it 20.
20, okay, great. So networking, that's one thing that I suggest to all of my clients. So you have a few minutes before they hit record for the podcast interview. And that's a great opportunity to ask the host of the podcast, how can I be a resource for you? And depending on what they say, that can lead to a lifelong relationship. I guested on my first podcast in 2014 with a woman named Natalie Ekdahl, who runs an organization called Biz Chicks. Since we first met and I was on her show in 2014, I've been on her podcast 3 times. She introduced me to very lucrative sponsors for my organization and for my conference. And the connections that we shared with each other led to mutually beneficial business opportunities. And that was just from the one podcast appearance that I had back in 2014. Another really hidden gem of the benefits of podcast guesting is that it improves your search engine optimization, or your SEO. So Google really likes when organic links point back to your website. And when you are a guest on a podcast, typically the host will create show notes, and in those show notes, it will have a link back to your website and your social media channels. And Google likes nothing more than seeing bunches of those links on different sites that point back to your website. And it makes it easier for you to get found in searches on Google. As Cindy had mentioned in the networking nuggets, you can reach a new audience, even on a small podcast that perhaps only gets 25 downloads per week. If those 25 people are your ideal client and they're listening to the podcast that you're a guest on, it is the same as speaking to a room of 25 people. And when you're in their ear holes, it's a very intimate interaction. So it definitely is a great way to get in touch with new people that would not know about you otherwise. It's free. So I love a free marketing strategy. Really, you can do it from the comfort of your own home. Podcast interviews, for the most part, are conducted over Zoom or Skype, just like this. And you don't have to incur the cost of traveling to a conference, leaving your home for a few days. And finally, if you know how to monetize your guest appearances, it can lead to new clients and leads, which I think we all love that piece. So how do you get booked? It's the big question. First place to start is by getting clear on your interview topics. So I work with my clients both through one-on-one opportunities, a group program, and with my done-for-you concierge clients to frame their expertise into soundbite interview topics that will get the attention of the podcast hosts, that will easily be able to determine that this person has a great topic that will help educate, inform, or inspire my audience. So really ask yourself, what's your special sauce? What are you known for? I heard a lot of great introductions during the networking commercial time. I'd love to see you all put in the chat, what's your secret sauce? What's your special sauce? What are you known for? So feel free to go ahead and put that in the chat. What is the top challenge that you help your clients solve? So I know Debbie is the queen of this, is thinking about what problems do you solve for your clients? That really is what boils down to what a great interview topic is. So think about some of the biggest challenges that your clients have and how do you solve it? So for me, the biggest challenge I see my clients have is how do I get booked on podcasts as a guest? Boom, there's one of my interview topics. Another one is, how do I monetize my podcast appearances? Boom, that's another podcast topic. So think in terms of, what do you help your clients do? Those are typically great podcast topics. What would they be searching for on Google if they weren't talking to you? So if they're just going to the computer to say, like, how do I network, or how do I make new connections in a community? Those are great interview topics. So think about problem, solution, and your expertise. What's the intersection between those three? So the next is the who. So who is your target audience? Who do you want to get in front of? So again, I like to refer this back to, who are the clients of yours that you absolutely love working with? So I even like to picture the people or the person in my head of who is that ideal client that I like to serve, and what kind of podcasts do they listen to? So, Marcel, you're in the marketing space, social media space. Your folks are probably listening to a lot of social media how-to podcasts. So those would be great podcasts for you to go on. Raquel, you're in the mompreneur space. There are a lot of amazing podcasts that are focused on mompreneurs. So the more targeted that you can get on who your audience actually is, where do they live? How old are they? Are they a stay-at-home mom? Are they a corporate working dad and the sole income earner? Are they in a band? Like, get as clear as you possibly can about who your person is, because there is a podcast for that. I can't tell you how many interesting podcasts there are. I recently discovered one this summer where I was waking up way too early in the morning at like 4 a.m. and having a hard time going back to sleep. I found a podcast called Bedtime Stories for Adults, and you listen to the podcast and it puts you back to sleep. It's amazing. I shared about that in my newsletter, honestly, because it's such a great podcast. She reads the story once and nothing really much happens. It's like about going to the store, like going to the hardware store. And then she reads it again a little bit slower, and I'm always asleep by the time she finishes that second reading. It's great. If you need help sleeping, that's the podcast. Whoops, I think I just skipped here. I went backwards. Let's go back. Okay, so your target audience. Just think about what podcasts would they go to learn about things they're interested in. Another great tip for this is if you have an email list, ask your email subscribers, what podcasts are you listening to? They'll tell you, and then you can start researching those podcasts. So moving on to how to find the perfect podcast for you and for you to get on to share your expertise. Since we have a few exceptional connectors on the call, I'm sure you will agree with this, is you start with your personal network. We all want to help our personal network and our friends and our trusted colleagues. And most of us are so busy with our everyday lives of work and family and volunteer obligations and helping kids with homeschool. Oh my gosh. So we're not thinking about all the people in our network that we could be helping. But if you take the time to make a very specific ask, they are more than happy to help you accomplish your goals. And this is something that I like to remind people of when I ran Business Among Moms, is people are much more likely to do what you want them to do if you ask them. So in sales, you need to ask people to do business with you. You need to invite people to sign up for your email list. Whatever the thing is that you want people to do, you do need to invite them. And so starting with your personal network, I invite you to make a list of everybody that you know that has a podcast. And it doesn't have to be a podcast host that's in your area of genius. It can be any podcaster, because it is a kind of a small connected industry, and a lot of podcast hosts know each other. So once you define who your podcaster friends are, you can reach out to them and just say, hey, you know, I'm starting to share my expertise in this area on podcast. I'm just going to mute the person that just came on there. Okay. This is an area where I've found that I can share some really helpful information. And I'm now available to guests on podcasts. Who do you know that has a show? And I like to make it really easy for people. So list the categories of the shows that you would like to be on, and maybe list one of your interview topics, and just ask, who do you know? Chances are they will come back and introduce you to somebody that you wouldn't have known otherwise. And there you go. You've got a podcast guest booking. Another great way is to look at your competition and your mentors. So if you notice that in your space, you have some competitors that are showing up on podcasts, look and see what kind of shows they're on and what are their interview topics, and see, is there a way that you could put a different perspective on that interview topic and go on that same show. Same thing with your mentors. Sometimes the people that are a little bit further along than you, it may seem like it'll be easy for them to get on shows, but there's room for everybody. I like to say there are hundreds of people that do the same thing as you, but there is only one of you to share your story. There's only one person with your story, and that's you. So as again, Cyndi mentioned in the networking nuggets, that sharing your story or your client's stories of transformation on podcasts is the best way to engage listeners, right? Humans, we are designed, we are wired to learn through stories. And that's why podcasting is such an amazing medium, I think, for developing your audience, engaging with listeners, and teaching. After you have covered your network and your competition and your mentors, then you can kind of start doing some research on the different podcast platforms. So there's Apple, there's Spotify, there's Stitcher. There are a number of different podcasting platforms that allow you to do some searches. So again, I go into that in much greater detail when I'm working one-on-one with clients or in my group programs, but that kind of gives you an idea of how to get started. Just gonna do a time check here. All right, 8 minutes left. And I hope, Cindy, do we have some time for Q&A?
We're going to do takeaways.
Takeaways. Okay, great, great. And I'm happy to help people afterwards. I know I'm covering a lot, so if you have specific questions, you can always pop me an email at julie@yourexpertguest.com. So we talked about why podcast. We talked about how to get onto podcasts. Now we're going to talk about how to leverage your interview. So what I mean by that is how to actually get more clients out of a podcast interview. So again, I want you to be very focused on the problem that you're solving for your clients. What is their pain? What solution are you providing for them? And how are you solving it? How are you removing that pain? If you have testimonials from your customers or your clients, I always encourage people to keep a folder of that, and however you organize your files, go back and look at it on occasion and use the words that your clients use, because you're using their words back to them, which helps them hear it and understand it more. But use those words when you are reaching out to be on a podcast, when you're on the podcast. The more you can use those words, the better. That really helps to encourage people to reach out to you after they hear your interview. I just gave an example here of how to get booked on podcasts when you're a busy entrepreneur. So that would be one of my topics that I talk on podcasts about. So think about the solution that you're providing. You always want to approach your interviews from the perspective of serving the listener and serving the host's audience. I encourage my clients when they're reaching out to podcast hosts to think about what will the listener learn on the actual interview. So what will be their takeaways? When you use those in your email outreach to the hosts, make sure you share one or two listener takeaways, because in that way you're helping them get a picture of you, that you're a helpful thought leader, you're a helpful expert. You're not going on their podcast to just give a speech, because that's not what this platform is for. It's for having a conversation and an interview. When you are reaching out, you really want to make it easy for the host to say yes to your request. And as I mentioned earlier, so use storytelling. People learn best through stories. They provide a way for listeners to connect with you. When I go onto podcasts, I share pretty openly about a few things that are hard and maybe, not something that other people would share freely. So I talk about my cancer diagnosis 6 years ago. I have a form of leukemia, a chronic form of leukemia that has been a bit of a roller coaster journey for me. I am doing really well right now. I'm technically in remission, but I talk about that story. I talk about experiencing severe depression in 2019, which led me to sell my previous business. So I tell things that are human and that we all deal with throughout our life. On social media, you see a lot of people presenting their best life. They're living their best life, but what you don't see is some of the pain and the hurt and the vulnerability behind those posts. And I prefer to be a real human and share some of the stuff that I've gone through. And what that does is it allows people, when they hear me on podcasts, to feel like we have something in common and that we can connect to each other. So I've often had men say, gosh, I really appreciate you sharing that. And then they'll tell me a story about how depressed they were when they got divorced and that they didn't have anybody to talk to. And it just, I just can't cover this piece enough, is that if you want to use podcast guesting as a marketing strategy, to be prepared to share as much as you feel comfortable with about your story. Oops, I'm going forward too much. Yeah, again, people learn through stories, and I really coach my clients to think about, how are you informing, how are you being interesting, and how are you inspiring your clients. So usually your podcast interview should do one of those three things: either inform, interest, or inspire. And then finally, this is the most important thing. I had a client who, so I book her on podcasts. So really all she has to do is show up, do the interview, and me and my team do everything else. And I listened to her podcast interview, and we get to the end, and she doesn't share her website. She didn't share her free resource, which is this very beefy giveaway for companies to figure out their cultural identity. And I said to her, I said, I listened, the interview was great, but did she edit out your call to action? And she thought about it for a minute. She said, oh, I don't think I remembered to do it. I was like, no, that's the whole reason you're going on the show. So you always want to have a very clear single call to action. So if you are a podcast listener, you've probably noticed in the past that as they're wrapping up the interview, the host will often say, hey, Debbie, where can listeners go to learn more about you? And then you'll share your website, and then maybe you have something that could help the listeners. So it might be a free resource. And if you want to get the free resource, go to debbie.page/cashflow. So it's clear, it's easy to remember, it's short, it's not like this huge long URL that they're going to forget. You want it to be one single call to action. So it could be join a Facebook group. It could be book a 15-minute discovery call. There could be a free resource that they just go to download. You could invite them to follow you on social media. But whatever it is, you want to think about, what is your end goal with being on this podcast? For a lot of my clients, it's to grow their email list. And so they will have a free resource that the person would download from the website. So they enter in their email address, they get the free resource, win-win. You know, you get the email address that then you can email them on a regular basis and stay in touch with them. And maybe when the timing's right, perhaps they'll think of you to hire you for whatever it is that you do. But those are really the keys. The other cool things is that you can use your podcast interviews to repurpose content. So you can take nuggets from interviews and create social media posts. You can create blog posts. You can do quotables. You could do a webinar with content that you put out there in a podcast interview. There's so many different things you can do. I also suggest that you track and measure. So again, if you are serious about podcast guesting, you are going to want to make a spreadsheet that shows the show that you were on, what category it's in, what did you talk about, how many leads did you get from that show, and what sort of revenue did you book? That's another really great way. And then you can start to see trends. For instance, I speak a lot on podcasts that are in the marketing strategy space. Oops, my time's up, but I just have one more minute. So I have spoken on a LinkedIn strategy podcast. I've spoken on a sales podcast. I've spoken on a branding podcast. So I found that podcasts in those categories for me are very, there's a great return on investment. So that's where I'm focusing most of my podcast guesting efforts. So that's something that I would suggest, if you are interested in this route, that you take that approach of tracking and measuring, so that then you can do more of what's working. And let's see, last but not least, I've got some ways that I work with clients. And this is really just a good referral for me. I didn't get a chance to share this in the past. Are speakers that have used speaking as lead generation, because obviously it's a little bit tougher to speak in person nowadays. It's a virtual kind of thing. So speakers are a great referral. established entrepreneurs that have a marketing budget are a great referral for me. And then I love connecting with branding agencies. So the branding, PR, social media, those are great referral partners for me as well. So as I mentioned, I work with my clients in a done-for-you service capacity. That's more of a retainer. I do strategy sessions. So those would be one-to-one calls where I teach you how to frame your expertise into interview topics, how to find the perfect podcast for you, and then kind of a general template on how to reach out and do that. And then I have a group program that I offered for the first time about 2.5 months ago. And what's really fun is when I can come and speak to a group like this, where you already know each other to a certain degree, and we create a group just for you. So with Cindy's permission and blessing, I would love to offer this to the Exceptional Connections community, where we come together over 6 separate sessions. They're 90 minutes in length each. They're recorded Zoom calls. And you learn how to be a great podcast guest, how to come up with your interview topics, how to find the perfect shows, how to monetize those appearances. We do the A through Z. I'm having such a blast. We've just finished our 4th session with my existing groups. And the end goal is to have you booked on podcasts at the end. So, what else can I say about this? It's just super fun. And if you're interested in this in a strategy, it's really a great way to do it. It's normally $5.97. I'm doing a special offer for Exceptional Connections. If you book by Friday, the 11th, it's only $3.97. And all the sessions are recorded. So if you can't make them live, you do get the recordings. And I think Cindy has a handout that perhaps she'll share. We also have a free quiz that if you're kind of curious about podcast guesting and this has raised some curiosity for you, there's a quiz on my website that you can take. Just go to yourexpertguest.com. You can take this 2-minute quiz to find out if podcast guesting could help you grow your visibility. So I can't wait to hear your takeaways, and my contact information, I'll put that in the chat too if you have any questions. So thank you so much, Cindy. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, you're welcome. Great information and content and suggestions. Thank you, Julie. Let's go ahead and go with because we have some offerings that you made available very generously to our community. But this is an opportunity if you have any takeaways or afterglow thoughts. We're not going to tackle questions, but let me just tell you this before we take those, so you guys can unmute yourself, is Julie and I still have to settle on a date, but I'm going to have her on a conversation to connect. Let's get real. And we haven't really decided on our topic yet, but if this is of interest to you, put that in the chat box, because we'll have 45 to 50 minutes where we can talk, and then we do Q&A. So Julie, we can possibly strategically schedule that, you know, in terms of when you do your next event or next opportunity for everybody. So any takeaways, feel free to unmute yourself and shout it out.
I just wanted to say I loved looking at, I'm sorry, can I talk?
Yeah, go for it, Heidi.
Okay.
It's after you.
I mean, there are so many great topics or great points here, but what I really love was looking at your competitors and seeing where they are posting, you know, what podcasts, and also just putting your own spin on it, because like she was saying, you know, we all have our own flavor and the world is big enough for all of us. So thank you.
I'm glad that resonated with you. Awesome.
How about you, Karen?
I just loved the question that you started out with when you're on a podcast. How can I be a resource for you?
Yeah, because you never know where that's going to take you. And that's one of my favorite parts about podcast interviews is the people that I get to meet and where those connections, you know, they all sort of magically weave around, and it's just so fun to see where they end up.
I thought too, Cindy.
So Amy next, and then we'll go Nancy, and I think Trisha had her hand up.
I liked the reminder to
use your client's words from the testimonial. Like sometimes it's like, it's so just like trying to like figure out your words or whatever. It's like, well, the words are there. Your clients have already said them. It's like, yeah. And that thing about the resource thing, how can I be a resource? That actually works really well. I was on a 425 radio show, and anyways, I referred her to some people that could be in my network that were on her show. So it's great. It works.
Awesome. So is it Nancy next?
Yep. First, Julie, I'm glad you're feeling better.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. But what I got more than anything is I've never really even looked at podcasts. I have a non-traditional business, and there's a lot of things that you mentioned that align with what I already do. So now it's making my brain tick a little bit to want to get a little bit more of a feel of how it might actually be something that could help me. So thank you.
Awesome. That's great.
This is Lisa, and I just want to say, Julie, thank you for the presentation today. It was really, really fun, because I'll just say during COVID, I was doing a little tick mark of, I've been a guest on a total of 15 podcasts in the last
Good
year.
for you.
And our business is booming, and so much so that we're expanded into Los Angeles now. And so
That is awesome.
I think it's like, once you rip that, first Band-Aid, then it just like, it could be a flood. And it's really kind of fun to have, at least right now, I think there's 3 in the can that will be posted out in the next 2 months. And then I still have more to book going into the first part of 2021. So honestly,
Congratulations. That is awesome. Love hearing that.
Thank you.
I guess I'm next. Julie, I really like the fact that you brought up how to measure, and keep track of what topics works best. But I also believe that extends to everybody's business. I don't think that a lot of business owners actually really track their business.
Right.
And it's so important, because it makes life a lot easier, and you really save a lot of money, because if you're investing in the wrong direction, you can save so much money by measuring your business. Yeah.
Yep, for sure.
Awesome.
This is Raquel. May I speak?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Miss Julie. This was really juicy. Loved a lot of the nuggets, but the one that really touched me the most was when you said that people really want to hear about your transformation story. That's one that I've been working up to embracing, that whole idea of being vulnerable and sharing more about me as a human being, and that people really are interested, not just in my professional expertise, but also in my own personal story. So thank you for that.
Yeah, people want to do business with people they know. Like and trust, right?
This is Stephanie. It's good to see you again, Julie.
It's great to see you too.
And I do think, like what Dr. Raquel said, that your journey is just, it really hitting that emotional tie is what brings people in. But I also really like the reminder about repurposing the content. Some people think it's a one and done, and it's not a one and done. It's a beginning step.
Yep.
And as well as the tracking. I'm a spreadsheet gal, so you're talking my language.
Yay for spreadsheets.
So thank you, and great to see you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Great takeaways, guys. I love it. Thank you for the juicy content, Julie, and the great presentation. You're amazing. Really appreciate you bringing this to, putting it within our view again, because sometimes we've heard about podcasts,
sure,
we've listened to podcasts, but we don't think about us being in a podcast, right? And being able to be a contribution to others, just like others have contributed to us. So thank you so much for that.
Wonderful.
So I'm